Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Do you want to live a great life? Most young men would say yes, but living a great life doesn't just happen by chance. It's a result of making wise decisions every day on things like how you use technology, what kind of friendships you build, and how much work you're willing to do. And good decision making starts when you're young. Too many of our young men die before they reach adulthood, and too many of them are scarred for life by the pain they've experienced, says Gary Chapman, co-author with Clarence Shuler of Choose Greatness, 11 Wise Decisions That Brave Young Men Make. As we reflect upon the hundreds of individuals that we have counseled through the years, we are both convinced that the decisions that are made between the ages of 11 and 16 will largely determine the quality of life that a man experiences after he becomes an adult. Dr. Clarence Shuler is the president and CEO of BLR, Building Lasting Relationships. He's a counselor, speaker, and author of several books, including Winning the Race to Unity, Is Racial Reconciliation Really Working?, Keeping Your Wife Your Best Friend, and Single and Free to Be Me. He and his wife Brenda live in Colorado Springs and have 3 adult children. For more information, visit ClarenceShuler.com. Here to discuss his new book, Choose Greatness, 11 Wise Decisions That Brave Young Men Make, is Dr. Clarence Shuler. Clarence, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Rabbi Walker, thanks so much for having me on the show. Glad to be with you.
We're glad to have you, and any friend of Gary Chapman is a good friend of ours. He has been on our program, and what a fine man and what an incredible contribution he has made. And to have him partner with you on this is a tribute to the incredible contribution you've made, because he just wouldn't put his name to something that just was not breakthrough. He's a man about breakthrough.
He is.
He really is. Clarence, take us back to your early years. We want to know who you used to be. We want to know before your 2 Corinthians 5:17, new creation and Messiah, who was little Clarence Shuler, and what was life like for him?
Well, I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I was born in 1954, so I experienced, segregation in the South, and of course, it's actually better in the South than it was anyplace else. But even though segregation had been outlawed by the time I met Gary, it was still in practice. I went to an all-black high school. My buddy Russell went to integrated high school and was a ladies' man. And so some beautiful young girls who were also Christians invited him to their church, and their church had a gym. Well, in North Carolina, you have basketball, tobacco, and Baptist pretty much in order. So basketball was my God before I became a Christian. And so I went to be Russell's bodyguard because he was pretty short. He was only 4 feet 7 inches tall. I was much bigger. I was 4 feet 8. So I was his bodyguard. Sure enough, we were only 2 black kids there, about 100 kids. But everything was cool. And Gary came on the basketball court and began to develop a relationship with us. And that's how I met him. That's where I was. And I went to church. I've been baptized when I was 9 years old. I was not a believer, but I was in good standing with the church, had good parents, and made good grades, so that's kind of where I was. I was just trying to navigate life and find out who I was.
So as you began to develop and grow, you had this encounter with Dr. Gary Chapman. How did that play out? How did that relationship develop? How did you keep that going? What kind of influence was he? Was he a regular influence, or was this just a one-time occurrence?
Well, I began to spend time with him and go to this church event once a week on Friday nights or Saturday nights. And it was a good way to keep me out of trouble, I guess. Russell and I went, and they would go. So I didn't see him on a regular basis at once a week. And then, but I watched him like a hawk because, just to be honest, blacks and whites weren't good friends back then. I mean, still our tension now. And so I was very careful watching him, but there was something about him that he had that I didn't have. And so on a retreat 2 years later, and this was after I'd made the high school basketball team, I got everything I thought I wanted, but there's still an emptiness inside. I went on this retreat, And Gary just simply preached, "Is your life complete? Is something missing in your life?" And I realized I needed Jesus Christ, and so I accepted Christ. And that's when our relationship really changed, and that's when he began to disciple me about a year later, and we've been together ever since.
What was it that you saw in him that was so extraordinary?
I think it was Jesus. I think it's just being a person led by the Holy Spirit, trying to live convictions. Um, it was just something, I guess, really say supernatural, just different, and it drew me to him. And when he was introduced me to Jesus Christ, he said, "For God so loved the world," and I knew that verse. I've been in church. He said, "That's He said, but really, Clarence, God so loves Clarence." He said, "Because when you think about the world, He's thinking about you." And that was a real profound statement that he made that God used to bring me to Himself. So that was different about him.
Did you ever feel like Gary Chapman never saw the exterior of Clarence Shuler? That all he ever saw was your heart?
No, he knew I was black. I think a lot of times people say I'm colorblind. Usually, they have an issue with the issue of race, but no, that was a big deal. In fact, we went to a Bible study once, and I think we talked about it in the book. He and I often talk about it together. But first time he picked us up, we're two 14-year-old guys. He picks us up, comes to my neighborhood, and he gets out of the car and says, "Hey, you boys ready to go?" And my buddy, who was 14 but 6'2", said, "Hey, we're not boys," because we seen white men call our dads boys. And so even though we were boys, no white guy could call us boy. And so we went to a Bible study, but after Bible study, we spent a couple hours in the car talking about boy. And he shared his perspective, say, "Hey, I would have called white guys, I would call them boys. I would, I didn't mean anything." And then we shared our perspective. And after that, he said, he's never called a young African American man boy because he understands the context. So those are things we worked on. So color and who we were was very much a part of our relation. So we didn't avoid color or race. It just wasn't a priority. But we definitely knew, he knew I was black, I knew he was white. So yeah.
In your family, you had a dad that was home?
Yes. Yeah. Had a great dad.
So you didn't face the challenge that many of our young black teenagers are facing today of being raised in a fatherless home and dealing with the issue of not having the role model and not having that male influence in the home. I was born in '52, so just a couple years older than you. Fatherlessness was not the big issue of the day of that time, but it's a huge issue today, and it's prominent in the Latino community. It's prominent in the African American community. It's even becoming very prominent in the white community, which was at one point almost a very minor segment of that demographic, but now it's becoming even more so. So it's that much more important that we find a way to reach a generation that's got this environment where there is no father, and then the environment where there may be a father, but are they equipped to lead, guide, and direct their sons into this decision matrix of these wise decisions that you and Dr. Chapman have come up with that are going to lead them to a life of fulfillment and a life of promise. This isn't a book that guarantees success, but it guarantees that if you don't do these things, you might wind up making some really bad decisions. That's
yeah.
the value proposition.
Well, it is. And in fact, if you don't do these things, you can almost guarantee you're going to be in a bad situation. In regards to when I grew up, it was abnormal not to have a father in the home, as African Americans. I think when we don't have time to go into it here, but I'm writing a new book about this. When people talk about the fatherlessness in the black community, there are causes and effects of why that is. And so, historically, things have done to put blacks in certain places to keep them from having opportunities to excel. So I think when we mention that, we need to put the whole story out there, because if not, it's a natural tendency that blacks or Latinos are inherently more evil than anybody else. If we go by numbers, there are actually more fatherless white kids than anybody in America because it's simply a number. So I think the issue is not so much which kids don't have fathers. We're just trying to help all those who have fathers. And we address that when we talk to single moms about how to find a guy, a mentor for their son, and where to go and how to do those things.
You know, although this isn't our topic of conversation, I find that I grew up in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh was a segregated city, but the segregation was between Jews and Catholics. And in the white Jewish community that I grew up in, it was surrounded by a Catholic community that persecuted us, and we couldn't join certain clubs, we couldn't be members, we couldn't go to certain places. The anti-Semitism was what we were familiar with. We as kids didn't know racism. I walked to school every day holding the hands of a little black girl named Regina Jones. She was my best friend. Okay, so 7-year-old, I'm walking down the street holding hands with little Regina Jones. I'll remember her all my life because my other friends were in front of us, or other friends were behind us, but it was, and most of my friends were holding friends with their little Valentine, but I was the only one that was holding the hand of a little black girl named Regina Jones, and no one thought a thing about it. We walked to school together, we walked home at lunch, we walked back from lunch back to school. This was a daily routine, and you know, my mother told me that if you're walking with a young girl, that you walk on the outside closest to the curb, and you hold her hand because you want to make sure that she doesn't fall. So it wasn't hold this white girl's hand, this black. When you know, I was being trained up to be a gentleman, you know, with good manners at a young age. Thought nothing of, nor did any of my friends think anything of this. But we knew that there were places where we couldn't go because we were Jewish. Right? So I knew a form of racism in the form of anti-Semitism that's not often talked about during the 50s and the 60s because this was such a large issue, very focused on the black community. It wasn't until the integration of the high schools in Pittsburgh, and it was at the high school level that the conflict began. It wasn't at the elementary school level. And we only had elementary through 8th grade. We had no middle school concept at that time. I believe racism is worse today than it was 60 years ago. I believe that racism has made its way to the pew in the church, and that there are as many Christian racists as there are non-believing racists, and I don't understand it. I don't get it. I'm puzzled by it. I don't understand. I struggle with the rejection of Jesus as a Jew. I struggle with anti-Semitism. I struggle with the fact that you were created in the image of God. That doesn't mean that we're talking about your external image. We're talking about this image, which is your heart, which is your spirit, which is your soul, which is what God imbued you. And that anything I do to you, I do to Him. Anything I say to you, I say to Him. Anything that I perpetrate against you, I perpetrate against Him. And that I'm living with a fear, a reverent fear of the consequences of what I do and say to you, because I'm saying it to my Maker, because you belong to Him. And He is your defender. He's going to protect you with His right hand, and I don't want His right hand coming across my left jaw. And so I just don't get it. And I know that this is a learned behavior, and that's why this is so important, because these are learned behaviors of wisdom. But racism is a learned behavior in today's environment and has been perpetuated by generations of learned behavior that I think is an abomination, and the church should be at the forefront of breaking down these barriers, and yet we have completely segregated the church. There are truly white churches and truly black churches, and I know that the inner city black church has a role it plays, and it is an entity and it is a cornerstone, but I think that it expands beyond that into the world we live in the body of Christ, and it is prevalent, and it is very problematic, very eroding, and corrupts our witness. And you can't be a believing in Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, and be anti-Semitic, because anti-Jewish is anti-Jesus, and you can't be a Bible-believing Christian and have even the slightest bit of racist thought, because you are one of God's creations, created in His image the same as I am, and that doesn't mean that God is black, brown. He's not the rainbow colors. He's not the black, brown. It's the heart. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. And so I'm so puzzled by this, Clarence. It boggles my mind.
Well, my first book deals with some of that, and the book I'm writing with now will deal with more of that. So hopefully I'll finish it this year, and I think it will help people to not necessarily agree, but it'll cause them to think and process.
Good. Well, I want to have you back on to cover that story, but I want to get back to this story. Okay. So Dr. Gary Chapman is there. You're with him. You're spending time with him. In the time you spend together, what were compared to today, as we look at some of the issues you were facing as a teenage boy or a young teenage male? I'll take boy out of the equation as well. A young teenage male, and how do we look at the differences between the issues that are facing young teenage males today and young teenage males of our generation?
Well, I think one thing that's common that I struggle with, that young men struggle with today, is identity. Their self-identity. Who are they? As they're trying to figure out who am I? I think that's a real big issue. I think one issue that I didn't struggle with, that the guys struggle with today more so than I did. Let me say, I didn't struggle with this as much. Is with the addition of technology, there are a lot of great things about technology. We're using it today, but I speak to a lot of young people, males and females, 12 years old and up, about pornography, sexting, dating, sex, all this stuff. And it's sad to the extent that pornography is just destroying so many young men's lives, but not just young men, but the women as well, as I've done research on women. And a lot of guys now, they're actually going away from their cell phones, smartphones, and getting flip phones. And so I think that's a real big issue, and it's so prominent in the way people dress on TV today as opposed to when you and I were younger. I think that's the biggest thing, getting them, and they can be so destructive even before they get married, and the whole concept of not even understand what biblical sex is and why you should wait, and that God's not against you. It's not he don't want you to have fun. He wants you to have a long-lasting relationship. So I think those are really big issues that we've struggled with sex, but not to the extent that the young people are struggling with today. And even Christian kids are struggling with today. I mean, I'm counseling a couple of kids now, starting talking to them, and Christian kids, and they're living together. And so I'm saying, if you're living together, it's almost the beginning of the end. And I say, really, why? And because they're not hearing this in church, which is really sad, which is a whole nother issue. So I think those are some of the real big issues that guys are struggling with. And then the social aspect, because you're texting all the time, you lose the ability to communicate face to face. And so sometimes you say things to people you would not normally say face to face. So those are just some of the issues. I don't want to talk too much once we get back in here, but those are some of the biggest gaps or differences between when I was growing up as a young man or a teenager and what I think young guys are wrestling with today.
We look at what's going on in Virginia with the governor, with the lieutenant governor, with the attorney general, with going back to high school yearbooks, going back and looking at behaviors and attitudes. It certainly is a negative commentary in a lot of ways, but can this be used in a positive way to impress upon our young people that what you do is a matter of record? And what can come back to haunt you? It's almost like the Miranda. We're not telling you to go out and get arrested so that somebody can say to you that you have the right to remain silent, that anything you say can and will be used against you. But we should be applying the Miranda in our teachings to our young people that anything you say can and will be used against you. And that here you are 25 years later going back to a yearbook. We had that in the Kavanaugh hearings, going back to a college yearbook. Now we've got a governor of a state going back to a high school yearbook. I went back to my yearbook to make sure that there was nothing in there. I think I told you that already. But we have this, can we use this as a positive teaching tool to really impress upon our youth that the decisions that you make today have a lasting, lifelong impact?
Oh, no question. You know, what we tell young people is with technology, nothing ever goes away. You know, you may delete it, but somebody can find it. And so, for example, just last year, a young couple, high school couple were dating. They took sexting pictures of each other, you know, which is totally naked. They shared it just with, supposedly just with each other, but someone else saw it. It got back to the parents, it got to the law, to the school. Well, the young man, I think when he took the picture, he was 17, but when it came out, he was 18. Well, in the state he was in, it was a felony. Immediately, this young man had a scholarship to a Division I football school, you know, to play football, hope to go to the pros. All that went away. And so now he's having lawyers. His parents are working so much to try and pay for the lawyers to get it reduced to a misdemeanor so he can go to school, have it taken off his record so he can, you know, but if nothing's changed, he's going to have a hard time going to college because his parents can't afford to go to college from something they thought was innocent. The other thing we tell young people, when you do that, when you break up with that girl or that guy, don't think those pictures are going away. They may share that with them even while you're dating that person. So you just don't have control of it once you take that picture. And do you want your future employee to pull that picture up? That can make a difference whether you get a job or not. So when we begin to have that discussion, they begin to like, wow, I didn't think about that. Because they're, and what the book does, it tries to have them look long-term, not just short-term. That's one of the biggest things, look long-term. What are the long-term possible consequences from what I'm doing and decisions I'm making? So we really want to focus on choices, decisions, consequences.
You know, that long view is something that is exemplified in King Solomon. In the short view, wisest man in the world. In the long view, wound up being a fallen hero, making every mistake out of lust and worship of other gods and doing all the things. But we take that out of it. But it's interesting that we read in James that if anybody lacks wisdom, he should ask for it. But if you look at God's word, King Solomon writes that fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you're going to ask for wisdom, the first thing you're going to get is probably get on your knees with the reverent fear of the Lord, because that's the beginning of the wisdom you just asked for. And so we need a long view picture of Scripture, looking at the entirety of the Word, all the Word, as it relates to each other. We can't just take a verse and say, oh, if anybody lacks wisdom, you should ask for it. No, you've got to go back to the origin of what wisdom and how it begins and tie all that together and take the long view. We're talking with Dr. Clarence Shuler, co-author with Dr. Gary Chapman of this new book called Choose Greatness, 11 Wise Decisions that brave young men make. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of these decisions that our young men are facing and our young people need to be addressing in order to be able to lay the foundation for a fruitful life. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Clarence Shuler, co-author of Choose Greatness, 11 Wise Decisions That Brave Young Men Make. Dr. Shuler, welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Clarence, what are some of the biggest issues? We talked about sexting, we talked about sex, peer pressure, technology? What are some of the other things that are influencing our youth and causing problems from them today that they're not finding the answers for at home or maybe not even in the church?
Well, one of the things we talked about before, you and I did, is about this issue of fatherlessness. And so we really encourage single moms that these young men find, they can help the young men find a trusted parent or adult who could be like a mentor to them. And maybe even the church or pastor can recommend some people. We also, unfortunately, with our society today, they need a background check, but that they can find that older man, because young guys really do want an older guy they can talk to, learn from. I think that's important. Education is huge. We also emphasize that because what you do in education can impact your earning potential, which impacts how you take care of your family and the choices or options you have. So education can go a long way. And we use Ben Carson as an example of a child, single parent, mother couldn't read, but she was smart and challenged him to read, do stuff. And through reading books in his room, it opened the world to him. So we think that's really important. So we think education is cool and it's worth that. A good work ethic, how to respect women and girls, because all that's tied to domestic violence and stuff like that. So those are some other things we really encourage. Choosing to live longer, what you put in your body can impact you, drugs and alcohol. Making diverse friendships. You talked about friendship with a young girl when you were in elementary school. Well, that impacted you for the rest of your life and probably impacted her for the rest of your life, So those are things we really encourage other people to, the young men we're talking to. And then finally, the truth about God. So those are some of the topics that we talk about to have young men examine that we think are really important.
We have such a contrary message being promoted that says that the bachelor degree of yesterday is no longer necessary to advance yourself in a job, that its value, everybody has one, everybody can get one, and so it's not that it's my generation, your generation. If you didn't have a degree, you were going to be relegated to being a mechanic or who knows what. So going to college was part of the program. It was just you did it.
Yeah.
You weren't asked about it. You weren't given a choice about it. It was part of the path that you were on, and that's just the way it was going to be. And you had absolutely no input in it whatsoever. It wasn't a discussion. I remember sitting down with my father, and I wasn't doing well in school. He said, "I'm sending you off to boarding school, and they'll take care of getting you straightened out. Don't confuse this for a conversation." He said,
"Well, your dad sounds like mine."
This is what
we couldn't afford a boarding school, so he said, when I hit the 9th grade, he said, "Don't bring any more C's into my house." He said, "You only got one job, that's to go to school, make good grades. I'm paying for the bills, the food." When I tested, I brought a C in there. He liked to have killed me. That's the last C I brought home. And that he didn't know about child psychology. But he said, "You're going to college." And so my dad was very much like yours, except I would rather had your dad to send me to boarding school and not spank me.
Well, he sent me off to boarding school, and I graduated high school at 16 and went to college at 16. Completely unprepared for the social aspects of it. The prep school had prepared me for the educational aspects, but at 16 I was not mature enough to not be swept up in this or that and really understand. So in the areas of academics, I was very much influenced by social distraction and by I was part of the drug culture and a hippie and political protests and political movements. And I look back on those years and who was it that said that if you weren't a liberal in your 20s and a capitalist in your 40s, then you haven't lived? You just haven't lived a real life. And so I was like that. I was a liberal in my 20s, and now I'm a conservative in my late 60s. And so we have these temptations and we have these distractions and we have peer pressure like we didn't have back when you and I were growing up. You had a different kind of peer pressure because of racism, but today it's the keeping up with, and it's the showing up and the showing off, and the you have more friends on Facebook, you have more followers on Instagram. It's all a matter of metrics and numbers and how good you look and what you're posting and how many followers and all those things. And it's such an incredible distraction. In your book, do you talk about how to use that for good and what the wise approach to technology is?
Well, we suggest that we think technology is great, and there's some great things about it. Easy access, but we think that technology, as far as communicating, it's like if I say, Rabbi Walker, let's meet at 3:00 today to do this. That's a great social media deal. Or, hey, I'm running late. I'll be 10 minutes late or half an hour late. Is that okay with you? We think those are great things. But I think if you and I have an issue, a problem, an emotional problem, we should not try and discuss that through social media, through Facebook or texting, because one can be misinterpreted and you can't hear voice inflection, don't hear face to face. So we think that's kind of a no-no. We really encourage people not to do that because, as we said earlier, you can't erase those things, and people lose friendships through text or social media. So we think anything that's really emotional, really important, do that face to face, or very least do that by phone. So those are some things we think about in regards to technology.
Of the 11 wise decisions that brave young men can make, is there one decision that all the other decisions build on? Is there one decision that really is the cornerstone or the capstone that leads to other wise decision making?
Well, I think the best decision you can make is have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I think that's the one of all the decisions you can make. I think that's the sharpest one, the smartest one, the best you can. And that impacts everything else. In fact, that gives you the ability to make the other wise decisions. That's what we think. So, but as we wrote to young men, because we're writing to young men who are Christian, some who aren't Christian, we did the research as they walk through it to build a relationship, to build trust. So when by the time they get down to knowing the truth about God, they'll trust us that we're telling the truth. It's still their decision to make, but at least they can look at that. So we think, if you ask me, the best decision you can make or the wisest, that's it. The truth about God, that personal relationship with Jesus Christ is the one decision over all the others.
Is it safe to say that a high percentage of young people, especially young men, are going to be exposed to drugs, are going to be exposed to alcohol, are going to be exposed to sex or to some type of pornography or encounter? I lived in a bubble. I wasn't exposed to drugs until I went off to prep school. And then in college, my parents had a bar in their house that when they had a cocktail party, they drank cocktails, and it was not a locked, but I had no temptation, I had no desire, my friends didn't drink. We hung out at a pool hall, and that's where we gathered and we shot pool and played pinball machines, and that's what we did. And then we would go have pizza, and then we would go home. I mean, that was our life in this little community where you could walk to or ride your bike or hitch a ride to get to the pool hall, which was owned by somebody that we went to synagogue with, who everybody knew. So everybody behind the counter knew you out of the Jewish community, and everybody that worked there was from the Jewish community. And so you couldn't get into too much trouble because everybody knew everybody, and they knew your mother, they knew your father, every shopkeeper, every store owner knew your parents. Everybody knew everybody in this small part of Pittsburgh that I grew up in. So everybody was watching all the time, kind of like the internet. So whatever you said or whatever you did was going to get back to either to a friend of your sister's or somebody that knew your dad or somebody that you were going to hear about it when you thought you got away with it. So you just didn't do anything because you knew you weren't going to get away with it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's really important to understand that those relationships are really key, and how we treat people through social media can really enhance that relationship, or it can really cause destruction. And there was accountability. What you talked about was accountability. We had the same thing too. My mother would tell me there were women around the neighborhood watching you to see what how you behave, and she would tell me she was proud of me when we were making decisions to do something wrong, and I decided not to do something wrong. Well, the next door neighbor, we were right in her window, which I didn't realize. Well, she told my mom. My mom said, "I'm so proud of you didn't do." And I'm like, "Whoa, I guess I really better be good because people are watching me." So, but it was good to have accountability. And people in our neighborhood years ago, you can't do it now. If they saw me doing something wrong, they would actually spank me and then bring me home to my mom, and then she would spank me, or my dad. So there was this real strong accountability in the neighborhood, which was, I think, is invaluable, and it was great. And like you said, in your neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. You had this big community, and it was great. And I think for us too, it gave us social identity. And it gave us security, having your mom and dad, but also having other adults affirm you that you can be something, you can do well, was really great. And I think a lot of times the kids today don't have that, which is why they're trying to buy. On Facebook, you can. There's an app that you can pay for, and you have more friends. It's just crazy, but they don't have that security, that relationship.
In the areas of building friendships, you offer advice, and in the wise decision number 9, you give advice to choose to build diverse friendships. Not just friendships, but diverse friendships. What's the wisdom behind that?
Well, if you look at the world, if you ever look beyond the United States, most of the world looks different than the majority in the United States. And if you understand Scripture, even in Revelation, God talks with every nation, every tribe are in front of Him. And so, and if you understand the whole idea between 1 Corinthians chapter 12 with spiritual gifts, the real emphasis is interdependency. Wherever your spiritual gift or gifts are, I need, and you need mine. And so the other people in the world who may not look like me, be different from me, I actually need them. And the more I learn about them, the more I learn about myself. And so we encourage people that not to be afraid of people who are different. And if you can make friends with people who are different, they're actually going to help you be better, and you will help them too. So it's a win-win for everybody. And we build that unity. And you mentioned earlier that the racism is worse today than it's ever been. If we as Christians start doing that, making friends with people who are different, we can show the world how to have unity, what I call real unity. And I think that's something we need to really work on.
Well, I completely agree with you. I think that also goes into the next wise decision is choose to invest time in helping others.
Yes, yeah.
That puts you into a diverse environment if you're going into an area that is less fortunate, if you're serving the needs, whether or not, and I remember as a young boy, we were required, my 2 sisters and I, and really every kid that we knew was required to volunteer somewhere. You could volunteer as a candy striper at the hospital. You could volunteer at the library. You could volunteer at the Carnegie Museum. You could volunteer at many volunteer opportunities, but we were raised in an environment where you were taught that you were going to spend a certain amount of your time, your free time, serving the needs of others. Whether it was at a nursing home, wherever it was, I chose to work at a hospital, and all I did was take a wheelchair and go to a room, pick somebody up and take them down and drop them off. That was a candy striper, but that's what I did. That was something that taught me to give back to my community, but it also made me feel a part of the community. And many of those older people that I wound up putting in a wheelchair, I wound up seeing at synagogue. I wound up running into them in the community, and they would say, "Oh, there's that nice young man that helped me at the hospital." And my mother would say, "You see, how it comes back. You see how it comes back. You see how it's not just a one-time thing. And so you promote this in helping others. Outside of the church, where would a young man find an opportunity to serve the needs of others?
Well, one thing we talk about, we try, like you did, we try and help get the young men to help other people who can't necessarily give them anything back, necessarily monetarily. My parents made me cut the grass of senior citizens and would not let me accept any money. But a lot of times as I would cut the grass, or they give me lemonade when between cutting the front and backyard, they would talk to me about life and education. They would share stories. And so I actually got rich just listening to those stories. And I also learned respect for elders. I think young guys today can just ask their mom or dad, say, who can I help? And they're usually in our neighborhoods, there are people who are senior citizens who can't help them financially, but have this a wealth of knowledge. And so I think it's really important that they could find those different ways. In school, a new student, they could help a new student adjust to school. Because some of the toughest things for kids is going to a new school where they have no friends, where their parents have moved somewhere. So that'd be a great thing to do. So we talk about a lot of different things like that, of just being a servant without expecting anything in return, but just trying to make a difference.
In this environment that we live in, parents tend to pull up on Sunday morning, drop their kids off in one building, and then drive over to their building. Right. And they expect this wisdom to be imparted by a youth pastor or a youth leader, and that they don't need to do this work at home because this work is being done. The kids are going to school, they're being given lessons about wisdom. They're going to church, they're being given lessons about wisdom. But this begins at home first and foremost, and so I see this as a book that should be in the hands of every parent first, before it winds up in the hands of a youth pastor, a youth leader, or a group leader, or a community organizer. Do you agree with that?
I believe that what the kids learn at church should only supplement what they're getting at home. That's what I really, really believe. But as we did we're doing more and more interviews around the country. We've had stepmothers call in and say, could my husband, my husband, who is not the biological father, use this book to build a relationship with my son? And we said that'd be a great idea. We encourage dads to get the book, read it first, and then let the son have his own book, and then they talk about it. They probably won't read it together, but they could talk about the questions at the end of every chapter. Be a great way to build a relationship. And some guys might feel, well, I'm uncomfortable now. They're teenagers. They really don't want me, but they really do. But the father has to initiate that. And so we encourage them to do that. And when they begin to do it, they say it's priceless. And even my non-Christian friends will come to me and say, my sons are really enjoying the book because it's a fresh voice, it's a third voice, it's not my voice. And we can talk about those things. And they say, now my son's reading this, they actually think I'm smarter because the book agrees with a lot of things I've been telling them. So it's just really affirmation in a lot of ways.
What do you find of the 11 is the most difficult to have the conversation about?
Oh, being sexually responsible, without question. Because, as a young guy, you have your sex drive, your body's changing, you see girls, you're attracted to them. And so that becomes a real issue, and so we talk about that. We're pretty explicit about not letting other men touch you inappropriately or even peers. Because I serve as a chaplain for a sheriff's department here in Colorado Springs, and one of the commanders said that one of the new gang traditions now, part of initiation, is having a gang member penetrate a future gang member. And so we tell them, hey, that's not the way to go. And so we explain to them and talk to them about this. So we become very explicit and transparent and authentic, because if you're going to reach this generation, you have to be transparent and authentic. And young guys say it really helps them, because a lot of guys, they get in a situation, don't know what to do. And so we try to give them a roadmap before they get there, because I think you can't prepare for the crisis during the crisis. You have to prepare for the crisis before the crisis. So we try to give them a game plan how to do that.
When you're doing these workshops and these group teachings that you're
Yeah.
doing and meeting with, are you doing those with churches? Are you doing those in schools? Where are you being received the most?
Churches, but I have been called on college campuses. For the last 5, 6 years, I've been on college campuses, Christian campuses, where we have these interactions. Where I have a men's night only and I have a women's night only, and so women get a guy's perspective on issues. But also in the churches, they're putting young people together, 12 years old to 18-year-old, and we're talking about these issues. And so if I'm talking to the girls, their moms will be in there, some of the moms be in the room, and it's really funny because as we interact, because I don't lecture, we interact, so they can ask questions. It's funny, you look at the moms, they turn all kinds of colors as their girls are asking questions about relations, being very transparent. But the girls come up to me, and the boys do too, and they say, thanks so much for talking to us, because no one in our church would ever do this. We talked about the issues that we're struggling with pornography, or that girls struggle with pornography, or even the driver, or even we're wrestling with the temptation of same sex. What do we do? So we talk about that and it frees kids up, and also I learn a lot as well. So that's what I do. Yes.
You made the statement the church is not talking about it. Is this an area that the church should be talking about?
Well, my thing is, if God created sex, then we need to be talking about it. And if God says sex was good, we need to talk about it, but it's in the context of marriage, and we need to explain why that is. And we need to explain how to look forward to it, how to stay, out of bed until it's time, and why, the consequences of it. Because so many guys I talk to, they say, they've been married 2 or 3 or 4 times. They say, I think about being a virgin, I don't think I'll be married 2 or 3 or 4 times. And that's what they tell me without me saying anything. I said, really? I said, why is that? And they said, well, the whole idea about commitment. And I just wish I knew better, and so I don't take it for granted. So it's a great conversation that we need to have in the church. And I think sometimes our leaders are afraid to really address that issue. But it's something that people are sitting in pews say, I need help with this. Please talk to me about it. But if we don't, we don't. And so TV then becomes our guide.
You conclude the book with a message that says, choose life by asking good questions.
Right.
In the last 2 minutes that we have, what message do you have for our audience in regards to asking good questions?
Well, I think some of the good questions would simply be, and we touched on this, what are the long-term consequences from this action? If I do this, who will I hurt? Will I hurt myself? Will I hurt others? And then if we were Christian, I ask a question, will God get the most glory out of this situation, or will I embarrass God by what I do with this? So those are some of the questions that we have them to ask. Really, what are the long-term consequences if I do this? So even though they're caught up in the moment, they're starting to think, long-term. So those are just a few of the questions that we ask young men to ask. And then who will it hurt? Will it embarrass my parents? Will it embarrass my siblings? Will it embarrass my church or my community if I do this? What I'm doing, will it cause bodily harm? So those things we ask kids to process. For example, marijuana is legal in Colorado. It slows down your reflexes, especially at night. And so we challenge guys. So if you're driving at night and you love your friends, do you want to take that risk that your reflexes are slower, you might get in a car accident and hurt them? Well, that's not your intention. But doing marijuana is not really helpful, even though, quote, is legal by our state. And so we just have them, and when they think about it, I said, no, I don't want to do that. And so we're just asking those questions like that so they can process that.
Well, I think it's an important lesson that the decisions you make now are decisions for a lifetime.
Yes.
And that is the first decision you need to make is to accept Jesus as your Messiah, and then pursue the logical, practical, and reasonable way to live out this life, which is edifying, glorifying, and a reflection of the one who died for you. We've been talking with Dr. Clarence Shuler, co-author with Dr. Gary Chapman of a new book called Choose Greatness, 11 Wise Decisions that Brave Young Men Make. This is a tool for every parent, for every teacher, for every mentor, for every pastor, for every youth pastor, for anyone that interacts with youth of any kind, to be able to examine, even in your own life, whether or not you're making wise decisions, because it's never too late for you to turn the corner and start making wise decisions. But for you to play an important role in becoming a mentor or a teacher or someone who can be an influencer to know how to lead, guide, and direct the youth of America, the youth of the world, into a deeper understanding of the decisions that they should be making and making wise choices when faced with the myriad of challenges that our youth face today. Dr. Clarence Shuler, thank you for being with us here and sharing this with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring in the next edition of Revealing the Truth.